Hey, this is Matt once again. Welcome back to another video, and this is another paid request from Mark. Wanted me to react to another video, this time Back to the Future the Ride. A thrilling journey through time, pretty much the exploring how it was made, how it came about, the history of it, all of that, and in between all of that. But this is from the channel Everything and Nothing. Want to thank first off Mark for the paid request. If anyone wants to request any other type of videos, movie review, re-review, random thoughts, streams, commentaries, video game playthrough, tier list, ranking, whatever, PayPal's best way to do it. Do have a Cash App as well. Links are down below in info box. I'll get to it as soon as I can. And I also want to thank Everything and Nothing for allowing me to use the footage. I did ask and they said yes. So thank you for that. Check out their channel. I have the channel link. I have the link to the video, and I'll have a link to the channel down below. I'm looking on here. He's done history of the ET ride, which I never got to do because the one time I went there, Universal Studios Florida, it was closed. The Mummy, which I heard about the Mummy ride, I never got to ride it though. Confrontation, there was another ride that was closed when I went there. Jaws, which I never got to ride. Jurassic Park, which I did get to ride. That was a fun one. Twister, I forgot there was a Fast and Furious fucking ride, and it died. Just like I wish that franchise would die too. But this one is about Back to the Future, which I did ride back in the day, had a lot of fun, was probably my favorite ride at Universal Studios in Florida. So I'll pause the beginning. You checked out the video first or afterwards. You don't have me yapping about. But about 2 minutes in, let's get into it. Thank you once again, Everything or Nothing. Again, links are down below for all the stuff I just said. Pause the beginning. 3, 2, 1, pressing play.
Born out of friendly competition between Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, Back to the Future the Ride was a motion simulator themed around, of course, Back to the Future. The ride is a staple of the Universal theme park brand and was incredibly innovative for the theme park community as a whole.
Yeah,
It would
so
take
much
guests
fun.
on a wacky journey with Doc Brown through time with the help of Intamin, an OmniMax projection screen, and one of the best shot ride films of all time. Back to the Future the Ride will go down in history as a revolutionary.
It's cool they
motion
brought back
simulator
Christopher
that we all
Lloyd
miss
and
to
Thomas
this
F.
day.
Wilson.
So today, of course, we will be talking about the history of Back to the Future the Ride. In order to really paint the whole picture, we have to go back to the year 1980. Eddie Murphy made his first appearance on SNL, and Paul McCartney got arrested with 219 grams of weed in Japan. Also, Back to the Future is being written and developed by Robert
Poor
Zemeckis
Paul
and Bob
McCartney.
Gale. This would be their attempt at making a big blockbuster hit, and after a couple of critical but not so commercial successes, they were well due. The script would go into limbo, being tossed around from studio to studio.
Yeah, like
being denied
used
over
cars
40
being
times
one of
along the
them.
way, until they would land on Steven Spielberg's newly formed Universal-backed production company, Amblin. And with a little bit of collaboration from producers Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale would create one of the biggest films in modern pop culture cinema. It is no surprise to me that Back to the Future, when
Well,
it finally
first they
came
found
out in
success with
1985,
Romancing
was
the
such a huge
Stone,
success. What is there to
and
say
that
about Back
film
to the
helped them
Future
get
that hasn't already
Back
been
to the
said
Future.
a million times? It is one of my all-time favorites. The film has one of the best beat-the-clock moments of all time, and even though I've seen it a million times, I still feel like they might
Great
not make
movie.
it in time. Like they
Love
might
Back
mess
to the
up somehow.
Future.
Michael J. Fox and
1985.
Christopher Lloyd are forever icons as Doc and Marty, and of course all the
Which, I
wacky
mean, I
side
just had its
characters that make up the
anniversary,
entire
now that I
trilogy
think about
are a
it.
joy to watch. Just making this video alone makes me want to do another full trilogy rewatch. And of course, if you haven't seen Back to the Future, do yourself a favor and go watch that. Go watch it right now. Long story short, with the success of Back to the Future, it was obvious that Universal would be quick to cash in on their new hit franchise. And of course they would, with merchandising galore, cereal boxes, cartoons, all that. And a year later, Spielberg was
They don't
inspired
remember the
by fact that
cartoon,
George Lucas said that Universal
hated
could
the
never
video
do what Disney did
games.
with Star Tours, and Spielberg decided to partner with his roommate and friend Peter.
Oh, I forgot about
This is
Star
what we talked
Tours.
about in last week's
Wow.
video with E.T. and everything like that. This was all going on at the same time. Peter Alexander was the main mastermind behind Universal Orlando and most of the classic Universal attractions we all know and love.
They
This
were, I
idea, in
remember,
collaboration with the
when Universal
team
Studios
attraction, reawoke
Florida was
long-dead ideas for a
1989.
dedicated Universal theme park in
They Bet
Florida.
the Future
So
came out
basically, this is kind of the
1991?
root of the start of Universal Orlando as a whole.
Because when Universal
Originally,
Studios
the
first
idea was to
started,
create a
it
story-based
didn't do
roller
that well.
coaster with various show elements, but due to the limits of roller coaster technology,
In fact, the
at time,
first
they didn't.
day
Peter
it
was also
debuted,
kind
there
of
was like a big
concepting an
power
idea similar to
outage.
Spider-Man or Transformers, but due to technical limitations,
There was a
and
big power
Universal's
outage,
budget,
and
they
then people
opted
had
to
a
take
shit
page out
time
of
on like
Disney's
the
book
first
with
day
Lucas and make
at
it more
Universal
like a
Studios
normal motion
Florida.
simulator. At the time of its inception,
And then the
creators
Jaws
and
ride
writers
wasn't
of the
working, and that
original
took
films,
forever.
Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, were
They
too
took
deep
through
into the
like
production of Back to the Future
2
Part 3
versions.
to really be able to be involved with any of the conception of the ride itself. But they were both incredibly excited that Back to the Future was going to be made into a permanent theme park attraction. On a technical standpoint, motion simulators at the time were a much newer technology and were seen as way more impressive by the public than they are now. Universal would partner with Intamin on creating all the motion simulator technology, all the hydraulics and stuff. And it's kind of funny because years later, Intamin would actually make a story-based and themed roller coaster for Universal with Hagrid's, but that's for another story. The biggest challenge facing Back to the Future the ride was the ride film itself, and Universal had put together one of the most impressive pieces of practical special effects ever assembled for a theme park ride. The ride film for Back to the Future was not an easy task. It would essentially have to feel like one long take, done in a POV perspective of a flying car zipping around through the air.
Oh yeah,
Not to mention,
ambitious.
we made it in a time where CGI technology wasn't really a thing. The just 4-minute and 11-second ride film cost over $40 million to produce and took over 2 years to fully execute. The
$40
ride film
million,
was shot in
holy
OmniMax
shit.
format, which is similar to IMAX but uses a fisheye lens in order to immerse guests in the videos projected on a dome screen. This technology was more commonly used at the time in like science museums and stuff. The ride film was directed by legendary special effects expert Douglas.
I do
Trumbull.
wonder
He's
with
known
like
more
movie
popularly for
theaters
his works
how
in
they're
2001:
dwindling,
Space Odyssey and Close Encounters
and
of
they're
the Third
hoping.
Kind. Douglas was an expert
What's
on
that
working
called?
with models, which kind of came in handy.
The certain
considering
theaters
all of
where
the
you could get
locations
like
in the ride are
certain
all
spray of
miniatures. Very
water
similar,
or
again, to
certain
the way they
little
created the ride
things
film for
happening.
Star Tours at Disneyland.
I wonder
Both
if
Star
eventually
Tours
they're gonna
and
have to
Back
make
the
movie
Future's
theaters
ride
into
films would be a
this,
technical achievement in their
where
own right,
it's
and
like an
proved to be quite a
actual
challenge for
ride
those
like
who were
this,
making them.
but
all that hard work would really pay off for both of them. The ride film for Back to the Future is
it'd be too
stated to be one of
expensive.
the most expensive films ever made, considering the fact that it's at least over $10 million for every minute that is showcased on screen. Originally, when considering Doug, Spielberg kind of was against it due to a previous beef on his work on Close Encounters, due to the fact that I guess it took super long for Doug to deliver certain special effects shots for the film. There is actually a series of various back and forth dramas involving the ride footage, issues with syncing shots with a motion base for the simulator, most of the crew disagreeing and having different creative ideas for the ride. It was pretty much a fight every step of the way. Originally, the whole thing was going to be done in a live action format, and the use of miniatures would be done for shots that they actually couldn't get practically. But after various failed attempts of trying to do this, they decided to just stick to the miniatures, which is why Doug, with his various miniature experiences, was the best for the job. But it seemed like due to the previously mentioned beef, he really kind of had to prove himself. None of this was ever been done before on this level or in this format, and Doug really had to push for executives to allow him to make his own, like he had to actually build a test theater in order to do this, because otherwise he'd just be shooting blind. Doug needed this to make sure that he could.
But it is
actually
kind of
sync the
genius
footage to a motion
having
base.
a miniature
So it all makes
set
sense to me.
so you
But
film it
initially,
all
executives were
miniature,
hesitant to
but
give
then
Doug any
if you make it such a
funding to
big
pull
screen,
this
it
off.
make it seem as
Spielberg
if
would come in and
you're
basically
within
demand that the executives would give Doug
the
his
world.
test theater, and essentially kind of
Although technically it'd be like you're within the miniature.
Spielberg's like, I might have my disagreements, but you come after Doug, you come after me, which I respect. Very cool Spielberg move, one of many. Doug and his crew crafted a whole 4-minute adventure out of all miniatures, shooting on a motion-based camera boom that could slide on a track in between each set piece. Each time you crash into something on the ride was just a subtle way for them to hide all the edits in the film. The challenge that they faced was to give depth and life to these miniatures, but they were also incredibly detailed. You zoom past everything so fast you can't even stop to think about the fact that someone left a cup of coffee in the background of one of the shots. Fiberglass was used to create Ice Age walls.
Never
and
knows
lava
that
was
cup
made
of
out
coffee. That's
common
a
food
good
ingredients.
catch.
All of this adds so much charm to the ride, and the practical effects really give you the feeling that this all could be real. The dinosaurs that we see
When
at
they
the
worked
end
on,
were both
did they later
animatronic
work on Game of
puppets, which would move
Thrones?
in slow motion in order
Anyway.
to sync with the camera system. They would even use real live-action footage for the end when Biff crashes the DeLorean.
There were episodes of Game of Thrones last season where people just left cups of coffee and they were on the fucking show.
Throughout the ride, and a smart way they discovered to combat motion sickness for the film was to use Biff and the DeLorean in front of you as a way to give people something to focus on. It was kind of like an anchor point. Apparently without this you would get way more sick, especially when trying to sync the ride footage. They would often be fighting motion sickness themselves, so I think that's how they probably came up with this idea. But yeah, the Biff in front of you actually stops you from getting sicker from being in a motion simulator. Watching remasters of this ride film, you'll be blown away, and it really makes you just kind of upset when you think about what ride replaced it. Shout out to Douglas Trumbull for creating the best motion simulator of all time, and shout out to Peter
ride did
Alexander
replace
for really
this?
pushing some amazing creative forces into making one of the
I
best
forgot this
attractions
was
of all
gone.
time.
This ride
Again,
was
it took
gone.
2
I
years
forgot
to make
about-
a 4-minute video. The process of programming all of this was a painful mess. And
What
was
ride
essentially
did
a
replace
guessing game.
this? I'm
Eventually,
gonna be
they managed
pissed
to get it
too.
right.
You
The
don't- I'm
ride
sure you're
would
gonna say
officially
later.
get announced publicly in 1989 as part of the opening for the up-and-coming Universal Orlando theme park, which was set to open in mid-1990. And later on in July of that year, they would also announce that it would be coming to Hollywood in 1991. Universal spent enough in the development of this ride. They were definitely going to get their money's worth. When it came to actually building the ride, Universal Creative would have to find a way in order to fit as many
I
guests
think
as
it was-
possible through this experience.
This ride came
which
out
led them to
in
devise the
1991, I
idea to have
believe.
multiple ride vehicles layered on 3 different levels of the theater. Each theater would hold 12 ride vehicles, and in total the ride would have 24 vehicles holding 8 riders each, all running at the same time. 3 would be at the bottom level, 5 would be in the middle level, which is the best level for viewing because you are actually centered with the domed screen, and at the top would sit 4 other vehicles. They decided on the film being 4.5 minutes because apparently this is the perfect length to combat motion sickness. Any longer and apparently the chances of getting sick are much higher. So in total, with onboarding and offloading, this
Yeah, I mean,
experience
that's a good
took 6
point. You don't
minutes
want
in between show cycles.
the
And with
human
24
milkshake
riders
to
in
be
total,
the
this
star of the
allowed them to
show.
be able to keep up with modern day theme park capacity. Again, so much of this ride was Universal Creative learning as they go. Everything down to the design of the hallway length and turns was thought about.
I remember, like,
crafted
even
for
just
the
waiting in
experience.
line, it was cool because you have
At
all
the
these
time,
TV
this ride was
streams
really gonna prove that Universal
to
could
watch,
produce
like
a
Christopher
technically
Lloyd and
advanced
them talk to
attraction
you.
that would blow Star Tours out of the water. In order to fill in some story gaps and create all the pre-show story content for the ride, Universal would hire future Ant-Man director Peyton Reed to come onto the project with writing partner Mark Cohen to write out the entire pre-show and on.
I didn't know Peyton Reed was involved.
Anytime during the actual ride, Doc or Biff talked to you on the little communicator screen, that was all written by Mark and Peyton. This would kind of add to the story that Doug already created in the ride film. Both of them had tons of experience working on various roles in the production of the main trilogy, so they knew the characters well enough to create something that felt natural with the movies. According to Reed, originally they wanted to make the villain of it like Doc's evil twin brother or something like that, but Reed said he thought the idea was kind of stupid, which I agree with. That is stupid. Biff has kind of always been the villain of the Back to the Future series. I mean, if there is a villain, it's him. I mean, he's a generational level villain. He's like, even his like ancestors hate the McFlys.
Yeah, it
in some
made
kind of
sense to
way.
have
They were
Thomas
both
F. Wilson be the
excited to
villain.
actually write dialogue for the characters that they've been working with for so long. Unfortunately, Michael J. Fox was too big at the time and wouldn't come back to be a part of the ride. They would quickly shoot all the pre-show and live-action content for the ride, and they were now just kind of assembling all the pieces. At this point, it would be dropping way later than the original 1990 release date, and instead, the Back to the Future ride would first open at Universal Orlando on May 1st, 1991. Everyone
Yeah,
in
there you go,
attendance seemed to really
1991.
love the ride, and overnight it became a smash hit for the newly opened Orlando theme park, giving guests a continuation of the Back to the Future storyline that they could be a part of. According to legend, Steven Spielberg invited George Lucas to the opening celebration, and George was visibly upset that Spielberg managed to pull off something that could go head-to-head with Star Tours. I think this beef is mostly playful, and it's just Spielberg and Lucas kind of having like a friendly competition, but you know, they're both rich. I don't think it matters. I think they're both having a good time. The ride in total cost Universal $40 million. but
Yeah, I mean, they're
tons of
best
new people in
buddies. I mean,
Universal Orlando,
George
so
Lucas
for
was
sure
on
worth
that
the money. On the
50th
Hollywood side of
anniversary
things,
Jaws
they're having
documentary that
issues
came out
with building
recently.
a show building on the side of a mountain. Issues with the
He
foundation
visited
of the
Spielberg
building
on the
itself
set of
that delayed the
Jaws.
attraction from its original opening of the year 1991 all the way until 1993.
So they're
During the
like
construction of the
best
Hollywood
buds.
attraction, co-writer of the trilogy Bob Gale almost became in love with the attraction, often checking in on the construction as it was happening. Bob had some free time now to be a part of the attraction, and he seemed to be really excited to have a ride themed around his creation. David DeVos was the coordinator on the attraction in Hollywood, and due to the Orlando popularity, they knew that the ride would be a huge draw at the smaller Hollywood park. They realized that they would have to build a large queue system in order to accommodate the expected influx in guests. To fill in these portions, they would add TV screens which would play a behind-the-scenes reel of the original trilogy, as well as some more original footage that wouldn't be present in the Orlando version of the attraction, which would be made in collaboration with Rob Letterman, director of Shark Tale, Bob Gale, and also J.J. Abrams, who helped out by adding sound effects to the new ride footage. After 2 years of construction, they finally opened Back to the Future the Ride at Universal Studios Hollywood on June 12, 1993, and everyone was in attendance. Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, Tom Wilson, Ice-T. The ride was a huge hit.
Ice-T. How random.
People at Universal Studios.
You know that Back to the Future got
The early 90s were a
Ice-T.
real golden age for the park, with them getting both E.T. and Back to the Future within a couple of years of each other. Bob Gale said once the ride was opened, he was working on the lot, working on one of his own movies, and he would often sneak rides during his lunch break just because he loved it so much. There's like tons of pictures of him online in front of the Back to the Future ride. He's really one of us guys. Later on in 2001, Universal would build a third version of the ride in Japan, opening with the park on March 30th, 2001. Before we continue, let's discuss what guests would experience on Back to the Future the ride. Guests would enter the queue, which would be themed around the Institute of Future Technology, and we would be informed that we're supposed to be on a tour. This tour is to demonstrate the tech of the DeLorean time machine. Else we will be test riding in one of them, going one day in the future. Things get cut short when we learn that 50s Biff has managed to sneak his way to the future and is running loose in the Institute. Doc is freaking out and giving
top-notch
us the
security
behind how much of a problem Biff is. A really silly thing I like is that Doc has like a poster of Biff for presentation purposes, like just prepared. He just slides it down and it's already there, which I think is
Question is, where'd he get that
Doc
picture?
tells us to keep our eyes out, and if Biff
And what
gets
picture
access
was
to
that with
anything
Biff
in
with a
the Institute,
wrench?
It could be the end of the universe itself. Another favorite part of this pre-show video is that we kind of cut back and forth to this very robotically performed kind of secretary woman who's just kind of telling us, you know, to stay calm. Kind of gives us the vibe that it's like this pre-recorded video. It's very funny, and it's always like juxtaposing some kind of crazy situation. We cut back to Doc as he explains that they're combing the Institute for Biff. He also explains that Biff snuck in as a part of the tour and that we should not be persuaded by him because he's incredibly convincing. And after this, Doc puts Einstein in charge of watching over the security cameras for the Institute. Einstein is doing an alright job until he's distracted by a robotic dog treat machine. As he walks away from the cameras, of course, Biff takes control of them and starts to tell us that we've been swindled by Doc Brown into being guinea pigs for his lab experiments. And sometimes people don't come back from their time travel journeys. Biff says that we should be properly compensated for our work and says that he would throw us some cash if he could, but he says that if we can help him get a time machine, he would make it worth our while. This is when he's interrupted by the idiotic security of the Institute, who don't seem to realize Biff is the person they're looking for. They leave him alone, and Biff says that Doc can never stop him now as he spray paints the camera. Cut back to Doc in a frenzy, and he says that even though there's a security breach, he still wants to go through with the time travel experiment. He starts to give us the explanation of his new and faster 8-passenger DeLorean. We kind of get the idea that maybe Doc Brown's trying to use time traveling for entertainment purposes, which would make sense if we didn't have a whole movie series talking about how hard it is to time travel and all the problems that come with it. We cut back to Biff as he uses marbles.
Yeah, I mean,
to some of the security guards, and we cut
the whole
back
point
to
about
Doc
the Future
as he says that
3
shit
at the
worked,
end
but
is he
security
destroys it
remotely impenetrable,
because he
and it would
realizes
take a lot for someone to pull the plug.
there's
As
a
he
lot
says
of
this,
issues
though,
and problems
Biff
that comes
pulls
with
the plug,
time
shutting
travel.
down all the power, and Doc says, "Darn." This is when all of the monitors cut out, and we, at this point, are walking into that tiny little TV screen queue area, that little holding room before you actually get on the ride. The screen turns on in this room, and we see Doc as he attempts to give us the plan for our time travel experiment. This is when he is interrupted by Biff, who triggers the security in his office, locking Doc behind bars. Doc asks Biff how he managed to pull this off, and Biff calls Doc's security team a bunch of buttheads. We see a group of the Institute scientists that Biff has tied up, and they tell Doc that while they're doing experiments in 1955, he must have stowed away and snuck into the Institute. Doc explains to Biff that he needs to go back to 1955 to avoid creating a paradox, and Biff explains that he will with his new wheels, these new wheels being the DeLorean, but not before going on a joyride first. He says he'd like to stay in chat, but he just doesn't have the time. And we get the great line where he goes, "Wait, I got all the time I want." Biff then steals the time machine and skirts off, and Doc
God, this
starts having
brings
a
me
panic
back.
attack, thinking about the calamity that might follow if Biff gets that kind of power. He realizes he is trapped, and nobody besides him and the guests can help stop Biff with the power of his 8-person DeLorean and his remote control. Doc enlists us in helping stop Biff on his time-traveling joyride, and Doc explains
think it was
all the
19
chaos,
but it had
so
to
we
been
have
like
watch a
91,
final safety
92 when I
video. And you get a
went there.
hilarious cut back to the weirdly calm secretary lady.
Because
as
I
she
do
gives us the
vividly,
final
vividly
safety
remember a
speech.
lot of
The
this
safety
stuff.
video is fantastic. It's these like living crash test dummies, like, you know, getting their arms stuck in the door and everything. It's very fun, very silly. For the last time, we cut back to Doc, and he explains that we'll have to accelerate to 88 miles per hour and bump Biff. This will create a time vortex which will send Biff and us back to our original position at the Institute. Doc gives us one last hopeful speech, and we walk into the boarding room and get seated into our DeLorean ride vehicles. Once we're all seated and filed in, Doc appears on the screen above us and tells us that we will be using a time tracking device in order to figure out where Biff is. He's basically got him on like a space-time continuum, My Life 360. The ride vehicles begin to raise, and Doc tells us
It's
we're
like, sure, if you
accelerating
say so,
88 miles
Doc.
per hour. We quickly time travel and we land in 2015 Hill Valley, all futuristic and all.
When
we
you-
see
when that
Biff
used to
and
be the
chase
future,
begins, taking us
2015.
flying and sliding
Now it's
around
10 years ago,
futuristic Hill
Jesus.
Valley. As Biff appears on the ride vehicle screen to mock us, he says stuff like, "Gotta get some gas, Doc," as we slam into a Tesco sign. We zip around dodging various parts of the futuristic infrastructure, still keeping on our chase with Biff. We slam into another sign and are taken into a suburban neighborhood, and this is where Biff jukes us basically and almost has us crash into a house. Biff is just basically flexing his flying skills at this point and is making it incredibly hard on Doc for him.
Of course, the question is, how the hell did Biff figure out how to fly?
Again in time travels right before we crash into the clock tower in time travel at the last second. This is when we're taken into the icy glaciers of the Ice Age, and Biff leads us into an ice cave and says, "Back again, come on in," as we seek deep into the icy caverns of Hill Valley millions of years in the past.
Again, how
is
Biff
sneaking
knows how
around
to
us
fly,
when he
I don't
jumps
know.
out at us, causing an avalanche, and we barely escape the falling ice walls and even get slammed by one before we escape out of the cave. Biff time travels away again, but this is when our engine stalls mid-air. The DeLorean tips back down, facing the
that's
bottom
right.
of the ice cavern, and as we're falling, Doc's screaming, and in the last second, the engine kicks right back on, which I feel like is kind of a callback to the movie when Marty, you know, he's about to finally escape the 50s and the car doesn't work and he hits his head and then turns back on. I feel like that's kind of the bit that we're doing here, and I like it. We escape and zip backwards out of the cavern, which then the time machine reaches 88 miles per hour again.
I don't see, I
and
remember the
we end up
lava
in the
stuff.
primeval version of Hill Valley, featuring these large giant volcanoes. We are brought back into another cave where Biff seems to be taunting a T-Rex, trying to get it to attack us, and one of the dinosaurs hits Biff's vehicle, and we see him panic a little as Doc warns him to watch
I like
out
the
for
look of the
jaws
dinosaurs,
T-Rex.
too.
That's when the T-Rex swallows us, but we quickly back out of its mouth.
The look
and we
of
fall
the look of
into
the dinosaur I
pool
thought
of
looked really
lava. We
neat.
see Biff is also flowing down this lava river, and due to getting hit earlier, his engine is dead. Biff quickly drops the tough guy act and starts begging for his life, basically begging Doc to bump him at this point in order to save him from, you know, falling off the lava waterfall. In the last second, as Biff falls off the waterfall, we sneak up right behind him and bump him, sending us all through time back to the Institute of Future Technology. And this is when Biff crashes in and gets swarmed by a bunch of scientists. They all surround him and pull him out of the DeLorean, and Biff says, "You saved my life, you butthead," which I think is hilarious. Like, he's still pissed, even though, you know, Doc did the right thing. He could have just let Biff die, which I think would have been the better option in this case. But, you know, he did the right thing. Doc's a cool guy. I guess the real question is, do we get compensated considering the fact that we just saved the universe? I mean, Doc looks incredibly happy. Looks like we did him a huge solid. Are we getting any of the cut for, you know, doing any of that? Like, we did get placed in harm's way many times on the tour itself. I don't know. Maybe Biff did have a point. Another thing I forgot to shout out earlier in this video.
Yeah, give us
is
the money,
incredible
goddammit.
score by Alan Silvestri. He did the score for the ride and, of course, the original movies. And it's just incredible. It really builds the hype. Like when Doc's telling you what you got to do and how you got to stop Biff, it's super hype.
Yeah, the
Like,
music
you wanna,
is
like, run through the
wonderful,
doors.
and it
It's not
fits
super
with that
fun.
ride as well.
This ride is truly a classic, and it is such a crime that it doesn't exist anywhere in the world anymore. The Blu-ray copy of the trilogy that came out in 2011 has a whole high-def ride film, and it's a key
I remember
memory of my
that.
childhood watching this on loop. Originally, they planned for Universal to update the ride film to meet more modern standards and maybe add some additional ride experiences, but still keeping the Back to the Future name and theme. But this is Universal in the early 2000s, and they were going to replace anything with whatever was more popular. The ride in Hollywood and Orlando is showing its age. Universal didn't really want to, spend the money to update the ride itself, and they'd rather, bet on a new property if they were going to really spend the money to change anything at all. And I would argue Back to the Future is timeless, no pun intended, but I'm sure there's some weird data point out there that gave the executives at Universal the confidence to get rid of Back to the Future. Rumors began spreading of its closure in 2006, and industry insiders speculated that it would be replaced with either a Simpsons attraction or a Fast and the Furious one. Originally, the plan in Orlando would be to close one of the theaters and make a new attraction there, while still keeping the original Back to the Future ride. But in 2006, it would be publicly announced that both theaters would close on March 30th, 2007, which stirred up a lot of anger in the newly up-and-coming internet theme park community. I think this is famously really bad, and a lot of people got mad at this. This would also mean that the Hollywood version of the ride would be living on borrowed time, and they announced the closure of the Hollywood version in August of 2007, and would host the final closing ceremony featuring Christopher Lloyd and Bob Gale on Labor Day of 2007. They would also hold a contest where a lucky fan would win an actual 1981 DeLorean, which I thought was super cool, but in turn, this crushed Bob Gale. He was quoted saying, "It's a crime that Back to the Future the ride isn't there anymore. I was devastated when I heard that they were closing it. I was even there for the last day.
Man, poor Bob Gale.
How many days until they shut down.
If he had enough money, he'd probably put the
coverage.
ride in his own
I really think
backyard.
Bob said it best. It's an absolute crime what they did to the Back to the Future attraction, and I genuinely think the Simpsons ride is such a poor replacement. I'm not going to go into the history of the Simpsons ride because that'll be for another video, but they replaced one of the most impressive ride videos of all time with a horrible and incredibly dated, even at the time, CGI animated 3D Simpsons bit, which feels more similar to the 4D SpongeBob experience that you would see at like the Mall of America or something. I don't think the Simpsons ride in any way rivals the current version of Star Tours. I would ride Star Tours 10 times over before I would even think about riding on the Simpsons ride. I really do love the earlier episodes of The Simpsons, but I really feel like, considering the fact that they spent so much time and effort to create the Back to the Future ride, it could have maybe lasted longer. But now officially The Simpsons has been around for longer than Back to the Future the ride, which is again another crime. I hope that now, because The Simpsons are owned by Disney, that maybe this will mean that Universal will consider replacing it with something new. They're throwing salt in the wound even when you're on the Simpsons ride, because they make a joke about it replacing Back to the Future. We see Doc in animated form trying to take a loan out to save the Institute, and this is when Professor Fink crashes into the banker, forcing Doc to sell the Institute to Krusty the Clown, which creates Krusty Land, which is funny. I think the bit is funny, but man, like, you really gotta rub it in my face like that? Like, damn. The last version of the ride to close, we'd also get a horrible replacement with the Universal Japan version of Back to the Future, closing in 2016 and getting replaced with Despicable Me Minion Mayhem, which is incredibly depressing.
God.
I absolutely hate the Minions. I really do. It's disgusting.
Don't worry, you're not
I hate
alone.
them. I'm terrified of the
Little
OC Minion
turds in the wind.
Universal Hollywood. They need to demolish that. Universal Studios Japan seems to be the last park to keep a lot of their classic attractions, but even they have been entering a great replacement era, with their Jaws attraction looking like it's next on the chopping block. And Universal doesn't do the Disney thing at all of keeping their classics. Disney refreshed Star Tours with the Adventures Continue, where they added new missions and more variety to keep the ride interesting to modern audiences. And yes, there is more demand for Star Wars than Back to the Future, but I think Universal would benefit from keeping old rides.
I don't know about nowadays. nowadays,
factor that
I think
Disney has.
nowadays
I
people
love
want Back to the Future more than
ride.
Star
I wish every
Wars.
time I go to Universal that it's there. Whenever I go to Universal,
I really do believe that.
almost never go on the Simpsons ride. I have a platinum pass.
I bet if you
and
took a
even with
poll,
free
people
fun
would like
online,
Back
I
to the Future
still
more than
haven't
Star
been on
Wars
it in
nowadays. I
years.
really
I
do.
loved the Simpsons ride when I was a kid. Like I went on it maybe 100 times, so maybe that's why I'm so tired of it. But even as a kid, I knew that it wasn't as cool as the Back to the Future ride. That 2011 Blu-ray release was huge for someone that was obsessed with theme parks when they were a kid. This video is made to honor Bob Gale and all of us fellow Back to the Future ride fans. I really hope, you know, in the future, maybe they'll reprogram the Simpsons ride for a night and let us ride the Back to the Future ride one more time. They can do it. They have the capacity to be able to do it. Who knows? The Simpsons ride will get replaced with the Wicked ride pretty soon, and we'll all be singing Popular as we, you know, get shaken around in a motion simulator. But other than that, guys, this was the video. Hope you guys really liked it. Back to the Future the ride is awesome, super crazy. This video is way too long, but if you guys liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe, and you know, tell me what you guys want me to do next. I want to keep doing these Universal videos until eventually I've done all the classics. So what's up next? Is it Jaws? Is it Confrontation? Let me know. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. Peace.
Very nice. Well edited. A lot of cool information in there. I like that he went through the whole ride for those who didn't watch that Back to the Future Blu-ray. I was so silent because I was just, as he's talking and showing the images, I'm reliving in my head that one time I rode that ride back in the day. It was 1991, 1992, somewhere around there. It was very early in the 90s when one time I rode it. But it made such an impact that I still remember it to this day. And I remember seeing that Blu-ray and going, oh, that, like, as the images pop up, like, it just tipped into, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that too. And oh my God, I remember that too. So it's weird how there's a lot of stuff in that time period I can't remember. But, you know, that certain events, certain rides, certain pieces of entertainment and just create that spark. And, I mean, the Simpsons ride, never been on. It didn't look that worthwhile. The clips he showed, it didn't look that worthwhile. I don't know. I mean, I remember, was this Universal? Or was it Disney? The Hanna-Barbera ride. I remember that one. All the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, including Scooby-Doo. But I don't remember that was Universal, or I think it was Universal. But anyway, can't remember. Was that MGM? Fuck, I have to look that up now. Can't remember. Anyway, back to this. But this was fun. It was cool to hear about the making of the use of miniatures. I didn't realize that Douglas Trumbull and Spielberg had that animosity towards each other, but that was interesting to hear. But yeah, I remember that when Universal Studios Florida came out in 1980, well, I say 89, but it was announced 89, but eventually 90. They did the first day or so, it was like this big power outage, and their big rides like Jaws and Con, and I think Earthquake didn't work, and there was just a shit show, bad publicity. It took forever for the other rides to appear. Con and Earthquake eventually did. Then Jaws took longer because then they had to have a second version. And that was what, 1992 or 93 it finally came out? Somewhere like 92, something like that. And then this one, when Back to the Future ride came out, that definitely helped jumpstart a bit more monetary success for Universal. So Universal Studios Florida, and Hollywood, I don't know about Hollywood, but Florida definitely, Back to the Future helped them out a lot, that ride. So It is what it is. But yeah, that was very interesting. Nicely edited video. So thanks for watching. Take care. Thanks once again to Everything and Nothing. I know there's one more video of his that Mark wanted me to react to. I think it's the Jurassic Park one that I see over here. So I'll be doing that next, and I'll be the last of the 3 reactions Mark wanted me to do. So thank you. Hope everyone, if anyone watches this, give me your thoughts on the ride. Did you ride it? How did you feel about it? How you feel about the Simpsons ride replacing it? All that jazz. Feel free to comment. Take care. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye for now. Ciao.